So now we are going to do the web page automation. So the automation in the sense like I'm going to validate the error message. So I'm going to enter the username. So let the username be the learn more and the password name may be like 1234. I'm going to do this operation. So yesterday I have explained like if we need to inject a input, we need a help of the method called as an send keys. And where we are going to inject this input. So we are going to inject the input in the username text box. And how we are going to identify this username text box in the sense with the help of the elements. So like we can just right click and we can inspect this particular username field, the appropriate backend element will be displaying up. So this is the username field and this is the backend node which is mapped to the corresponding text box called as a username. If I hover my mouse over this particular node, okay, so it is highlighting in the UI as well. So which means like we can conclude. So this is the appropriate node for the username text box. So the node contains tag and elements and we are going to use the elements and with the help of an elements like we are going to do the automation. Like in order to like access the element, so we need the help of the locators. So I have explained like there is a concept called as an locators and we are going to seek help from the locators. So in today's class, so let us try to cover few basic locator called as an ID and name. So generally, so this ID locator, okay, will look for the ID attribute, okay. So ID attribute in each node. So for example, let's say like in this node, so like we need to check do we have an id attribute or not. So here we are having something called as an id is equal to username. So when you are planning to use this element in your coding, then for sure you should use a locator called as an id, because like only the id locator will look for the id attribute, and if the provided attribute value matches with the backend DOM structure, then it will do the appropriate action over the field. So now all these locator properties are stored inside the class called as an by. So we are having some special class in Selenium called as an by class. So this by class, so why I'm telling this as a class in the sense, even by the naming conversion, you can understand so whether it is a class or method. So like if you observe clearly, so whenever I typing something, so I'm following the appropriate naming conversion. If it is a method, so I'm following the like camel case rule. As it is of an like a single word, so we are having everything in a lower case. If you have a multiple words, then the following words first letter should be always in the caps. So we should follow the appropriate naming conversion. From the naming conversion, like we need to understand like whether it is a method or a class. So here we are going to use the class called as an by class. So even like yesterday in our coding, so if you see the naming conversion of the Chrome driver, so the Chrome driver is in the Pascal case, so which indicates the class. So if I hover my mouse over the Chrome driver, you could see the logo called as NC, so which indicates it's a class. Okay, so the get is a method. So like that is the reason like it is in the lower case, or we can say it is of a camel case. So now we are having the class called as an by. This by class holds the locator property. So always have this point in the mind, so stating that class contains method. So generally the class contains method. So inside the by class, so we will be having different methods like id method, name method, class method. Okay, so it's path method. So which means like for each and every locator, some methods will be available, and we are going to utilize those method. So whenever we are using the ID method, which directly indicates it's an ID locator, so this ID locator will always check the ID attribute available in each and every node, and if the provided attribute value matches, then it is going to do the respective action over the corresponding field. So now in this method, so we need to pass the attribute value. So whatever the attribute value we are going to use it up. So we need to pass the attribute value. Okay. So the attribute value in the sense it is going to be the kind of an string. So which means these methods will be a parameterized method. So like each and every method will be parameterized, and they will be having some variable name. And why these methods are parameterized in the sense, because like we are going to pass an argument, so which is nothing but we are going to pass a attribute value. Okay, so with the help of the locator, like we are going to perform the respective action. And at the high level, so we can say, so technically we are finding the element. So the operation we are doing here is like we are finding the element in backend DOM structure. Okay, and how we are going to find the element in the sense, so with the help of the locators, and all the locators properties are stored inside the by class, and class contains the method. So this is the theoretical statement. Now let us try to implement the same in our coding, and post that like you will get a better visualization. So now let me just open this IntelliJ. So the first line of coding, like we have written, like we have initialized the WebDriver, and with the help of the WebDriver, like we are utilizing the method called as an get, and with the help of the get method, like we are passing the appropriate URL, and we are going to do the automation only with the help of the WebDriver, which means like we need to call the WebDriver variable. So here I am giving the variable name as a driver, and it is there is no restriction like you should provide the variable name as a driver. So it is purely user choice. So in case if I am giving the variable name as a D, so wherever like you are calling this WebDriver property, so you should give it as a D. Okay, so it is a purely user choice. So the variable name should be unique, and you should follow the appropriate naming conversion. So there is no specific rule like you should always provide it as a driver. But in order to give the better picture, so I'm just typing everything fully. Okay, so now did someone did something. Okay, so now we are going to use the WebDriver, and the variable name of the WebDriver we call it as a driver. So when I like click on the driver, and if I give dot, it will give the suggestions. So what are the suggestions which are available in the sense, whatever the methods which are available it will be displaying. So as a automation test engineer, like you need to know the usage of each and every method. So one and only if you know the usage of the method, you can use the respective method wherever required. So initially, like we learn about the get method. So the usage of the get method is like we need to pass the URL. So the next method, like you need to know about it is like you need to know about the find element. So generally, we are going to find the element. So and how we are going to find the element in the sense, with the help of the by class. So which means there is a method available which we call as a find element, and even this is a parameterized method, and they are asking us to inject the by class as a input. So if they have mentioned as a string, then we can mention in the double quotation. If it is of an integer, we can pass the numerical value. If it is of a double, we can pass the decimal value. But here they are asking us to pass the by class as a input. So I'm just using the method called as an find element, or even if you type find element, like you will get the suggestion, and there will be two method. So one we call it as an find element, and another we call it as an find elements. So this find elements we can discuss at the later part. So as of now, try to use this method called as an find element. Okay, so now this find element is a parameterized method. So it is asking us to pass a input called as an by class. So again it is showing the suggestion stating that I expected one argument but found zero, which means like we need to pass a input. So what is the input we are going to pass? We are going to pass the by class. So I'm just typing as by. And after injecting this class, so I already told the class contains method. So we can use any of the method. So after by, I'm just clicking on the dot. Here, let me try to use a method called as an ID. So even this ID method is a parameterized method. So why it is parameterized in the sense like we need to provide the attribute value. So now I'm just using the method called as an ID, and as this ID method is parameterized method, and what is the input we need to inject in the sense we need to inject the string input. So I'm just mentioning in the double quotes, and inside which I'm going to pass the attribute value. So like in the respective node we are going to check the ID attribute and whatever the attribute value is mentioned. So basically, right, if you just click on it, so like you can easily copy paste it. So like whenever like you are going to use the attribute value in the coding, so please try to copy paste the value. So the reason why I'm telling in the sense because like whenever we try to enter manually, so we may made some mistake. So I'm just double click on this attribute value and I'm copying the attribute value. So now what happened when we run the automation script, like so this id locator will check the presence of id attribute, which means like so it will navigate to the backend DOM structure, and each and every node it will scan the id attribute. So here you could see there is an id attribute, but the attribute value mentioned here is like called as a left. So here it is a wrap main. So here is this wrapper, but in our coding like we have mentioned it as an username, which means like it will check line by line. So when it comes to this particular line, so for sure the attribute value will matches up. So whenever the attribute value matches in the respective line, so it will do the corresponding operation. So the corresponding operation in the sense we are going to inject the input. So in order to inject the input, the Selenium provides a method called as an send keys. So after this, just click on dot. So you will get a suggestion called as an send keys, get text, click, etc. So I'm going to use the send keys. So even the send keys is a parameterized method. So when the method is parameterized, so we should pass a argument inside it, and it is showing the suggestion as character sequence. So the character sequence is nothing but we call it as a string. So which means like we need to pass the input in the double quotes. So what is the input we are going to inject? Let's say I'm going to inject the input called as an learn more. So now if I try to right click and run this program, so what happened? Like it will invoke the browser, it will navigate to the Salesforce and post that it will enter the username called as and learn more. So how it is going to enter the username in the sense, because like we have mentioned the locator property, we have specified the locator, and whatever the locator which we have used, so we have mentioned the id locator. So which means like it will search that id attribute in the backend. So wherever the attribute value matches in the corresponding field, so it is going to inject the respective inject which we have provided. So if you notice like in the username field, it is entering the input called as an learn more. And how this injection occurs in the sense, because in our coding like we have provided the attribute value. So like as the attribute value matches in this particular line, so their respective operation is done. So in the upcoming session, we will be discussing more in detail, so how to choose this attribute value. So there are few rules and regulations. So this attribute value should be always unique, so we should cross verify whether the attribute value is unique or not. Or in other case, if we take another field, so let's take an password as an example. So what I'm going to do, I'm right clicking and inspecting this password field. So this is the node which is highlighting, and let us try to use the locator called as an id. So here they have mentioned like id is equal to password. We are having the element called as an id. So as this id element is available, we can use the id locator in our coding. And how we are going to do the automation, in the sense, with the help of the WebDriver, and the variable name of the driver, the variable name of the WebDriver is called as an driver. I can say driver dot, and we are going to use the method called as an find element. So why we are using the find element method, in the sense, because the find element method will find the backend elements which is mentioned in the DOM structure based upon the input provided by the user, or based upon the data specified by the user. So I'm using the find element. So this find element is a parameterized method. It is asking us to pass the by class. So I'm using the by class, and class contains method. I'm going to choose any of the locator property. So we are having many locators like its path, tag name, link text, name, class name, etc. But here we are going to use the id. So I'm selecting the id, and id is also a parameterized method, so which means like we need to pass an argument. So as it is of a string, so we should pass the input in the double quotes, which means like we are going to pass the attribute value over here. So now in this node, just double click on the attribute value. Okay, so I'm again repeating, try to copy paste the attribute value, so please don't type manually. So just double click on it, so just copy it up and place it over. And again, what operation like we are going to do in this corresponding node, in the sense, we are going to insert the input, which is nothing but we are going to type the password. So in order to insert an input, we should always use the send keys. So I'm giving the dot and send keys. So if you are not getting the suggestions right, so probably like remove the dot once again and keep the dot again, you will getting the suggestion. Okay, I'm using the send keys. So the send keys is a parameterized method, so which will accept the character sequence, which is nothing but a string. So I'm mentioning it in a double quotes called as an 123. So now if I right click and run this program, it is going to perform two operation. So one is like it will enter the username, and then it will enter the password. And how it is entering the username and password, in the sense, because like whatever the attribute value we are mentioning in the coding matches with the attribute value which is available in the backend DOM structure. So whenever there is an exact match of the attribute value in the backend DOM, so then in the respective node, it will do the corresponding operation. So let's say you could see like it has entered the learn more, followed by it has entered the password. Okay. So now in the other hand, so now let's try to provide the incorrect attribute value. So for sure, there won't be any element called as an id is equal to Aravind, because like in the backend DOM structure, so it is checking only the id element, right? So whatever the attribute value mentioned, it is going to search that respective attribute value only in the id element. If it is matches, then in the respective node it is going to performing the operation. So the reason is like the id locator will specifically look for an id attribute in each and every node. So now instead of providing the correct attribute value, I'm going to inject the wrong attribute value. So let me insert my name. Okay, and then let me try to run the script. So for sure, the attribute value called as an Aravind won't be available at the backend DOM structure. So now let's see how the program reacts. Okay, so it has opened the URL, but if you notice, like it is not enter the username. So whenever there is an error, the first and foremost thing, like we should look on the console. So as I told, like navigate to the last line mentioned in the console. It shows like we are having the error in the automation basic, in the basic automation class, in the main method, and in the line number 16. So what is the line number 16? This is the line number 16. It shows that error in the find element. So in order to know the exact error, like we need to navigate to the top. So I told like there will be keyword called as an exception in thread. So now like you should need to copy the respective exception. Okay, I will just copy the respective exception in the notepad. So what is the exception they have mentioned here is like it states that no such element exception. So what is meant by no such element exception in the sense the particular element is not mentioned. So when I type by ID in which in the double quotation, if I pass it is of an Aravind, so technically it indicates, so it will search the element. So what is the element which you're going to search? It will search the ID element. It will check whether ID is equal to Aravind is available in any node or not. So as this element is not available in any of the node, it states that no such element exception. So that is why it's throwing an error stating that unable to locate the element. So as the element is not located, so the respective action is not performed. So whenever there's no such element exception occurs, so which means like you have made the mistake. So you have injected the incorrect attribute value. So whenever there's no such element exception occurs, so make sure like what is the attribute value which you have mentioned in your coding. So if the attribute value is correct, then obviously like it is going to do the respective action on the respective field. Okay, so always make sure like you're providing the correct attribute value. So if no such element exception occurs, like you should look on the attribute value which you have mentioned in the coding. So as an automation test engineer, so we should like aware of the exception. So these we call it as an exception. So in today's session, like we have discussed till now, the two exception, like you need to know. So whenever the invalid argument exception occurs, it indicates like the user has passed the invalid input. So whenever the no such element exception occur, which indicates like we are using the wrong attribute value or incorrect attribute value, and due to which like it is unable to locate the element. Okay, so like we need to note down all the exceptions, and even in the interviews, right? So they will asking about the exception in detail. Okay, so always have the habit of note downing the exception as well. So now let me just finish this scenario. Like let me try to click this login button as well. So I'm just right clicking and I'm just inspecting this login button. So in this particular node, so we are having ID. So let us try to use the name attribute and the attribute value instead of an ID. So whenever you are going to use like any other attribute and attribute value, we should choose the appropriate locator. So like here you could see like we are having another locator called as a name. So what is the use of the name locator in the sense? It will specifically look for a name attribute in the respective node, which means like while doing the coding. Okay, so here I'm going to do the click operation. I can say I'm just calling the WebDriver and I'm going to find the element and I'm going to use any of the locator property. Let's say in this case I'm instead of an ID I'm going to use name. So when I'm using the name, In the respective node, so even though ID is available, so it is purely user choice. So they can use an ID or we can use a name, but there are many rules and regulations. So because like I not wish to overload all the rules in the day one of the locators. So day by day, like I will be optimizing this locators. So as of now, have in mind. So if you're using ID, so if you're using the ID locator, use ID attribute. If you're using the name locator, use the name attribute. So in my case, now I just mentioned the name attribute. So I'm just going to use the name locator. So I'm going to use the name attribute. So just I'm copying this login and I am in the double quotes, like I'm placing it up. Why I'm placing in the double quotes in the sense because this name method is the parameterized which will accept the string. So now what is the operation we are going to perform? So here we are not going to pass any input. We are going to just click on the login button. So like there is another method which we discussed called as a click method. So just use the click method. So now if I run this code, it should enter the username, it should enter the password, followed by it should click the login button as well. So if you notice, like it is entering the username, entering the password, and it is like enter the login button and post that like the error message is populating. And in the further sessions, like we are going to validate this error message, and in order to validate this error message, so we need the help of the Java. So whenever the validation comes into the picture, like we need Java. So whereas like in order to interact with the web page, like we need the help of the Selenium. Okay. So now we are able to enter the username and we are able to enter the password and we are able to click the login button successfully. So this is a small basic scenario so which we have automated. So till this point, does anyone have any doubt?